Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to IDG Live. Today we are looking at the oldest and the most famous Song of Ice and Fire theory there is out there, R+L=J. And I should probably say straight away, this is not a live stream. So if you are watching this as live, I've set it up as a premiere, so the chat is still there. Hi, moderators. Thank you so much for what you do. But I obviously cannot be taking questions live. So I have set this up as a charity live stream. Haven't yet decided which charity, but have a look. It's there. It will be a good one. Trust me. So if you did feel you wish to thank me for this in some way, then please do donate to this. So that's probably all the preamble we need. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do this as a bit of a two-parter. R+L=J is a massive topic. So today what we're going to do is we're going to be talking about the theory as a whole. What is the actual evidence for Jon being the son of Rhaegar and Lyanna? We now kind of assume it's the case because that's what happened in the TV show and that's what the majority of the fandom have thought for so long. But what's the actual evidence? Should we consider the alternatives? Is it a 100% thing? Are we actually only about 80 or 90%? So let's take a look at this. Let's see what we've got. And next time, what I will do is I will answer the questions that I've got from my patrons. So I asked my patrons any questions they wanted on R+L=J. And as you would expect, I got a wide variety of insightful and interesting questions. And next time, I will be covering all of them. So all of that preamble out of the way. This is, as I said, the oldest significant theory about A Song of Ice and Fire that there is out there. You can go as far back as, I think, 1998, if you look on various Reddit forums and the like, for the first time that somebody was suggesting this. But the question, I suppose, is why? Why is this such a significant theory? And I think the answer is that this was set up as a big mystery. From the very beginning of this story, this was one of the questions that we had. Other things emerged. Who tried to kill Bran, who killed Jon Arryn, all of those other questions started cropping up. But this was there very, very early on. Who is Jon Snow's mother? And this isn't just sort of casually dropped in once and then ignored. This is something which is pushed again and again and again as a significant issue. Tyrion, Cat, and Theon all mention this to Jon's face. They call him bastard to his face. Jon often, in the opening chapters of book one, wonders who his mother is. That carries on for a while. He all the way through the rest of the story, he keeps on wondering about his mother. King Robert speculates about who his mother might be. Ned clearly didn't want to talk about who Jon's mother might be, which in itself is a bit of a clue because he seems quite a straightforward guy, Ned. And then here suddenly there's something he's like clamming up. So I don't want to talk about it. This is clearly a secret. And it's also clearly important to the plot because it is made such a thing of so early on and carries on being a thing. Now, that's probably the first point that we have to make in all of this is that when we're looking for an answer here, it's not just is R+L=J a reasonable theory? It's what is going to be a solution that is satisfactory to this, because if we went through all of this, forget people saying about George R. R. Martin kind of subverting tropes or whatever. He understands how story works, and he has set something big up here, which means that whatever this is, it has to mean something. We can't get to 2/3 of the way through the story, towards the end of the story, whenever the big reveal is, and then it's oh yeah, Jon, so your mother was this insignificant character that we didn't hear from before, we're not going to hear from again, and it doesn't matter. That is not what this is about. There's something here, and it's a matter of trying to work out what that something is. Um, and as we're working through the clues, I think we should probably start by acknowledging that Ned did once give an answer to this. He gave an answer to somebody asking him who Jon's mother was. And here's the quote. It's Robert Baratheon. Robert Baratheon says, "There was that one time. What was her name, that common girl of yours? You know the one I mean, your bastard's mother. Her name was Willa," Ned replied with cool courtesy, "and I would sooner not speak of her." "Willa, yes," the king grinned. "She must have been a rare wench if she could make Lord Eddard Stark forget his honour even for an hour. You never told me what she looked like." Ned's mouth tightened in anger. "Nor will I. Leave it be, Robert, for the love you say you bear me. I dishonoured myself and I dishonoured Catelyn in the sight of gods and men." So here we have, and this is important, I think, the one person that Ned can't just ignore and dismiss. Everybody else in his world, he's a Lord Paramount. The only person in this world who outranks him is Robert Baratheon, and Robert Baratheon is asking him direct. And Ned gives him an answer, but tries to shut this down straight away. "I don't want to talk about it." He says her name was Willa, but I'd sooner not speak of her. And then he's clearly uncomfortable. He replies with cool courtesy, his mouth tightened in anger. He says, "Leave it be, Robert." He's not happy. He doesn't want to talk about this. So again, the mystery increases. He's given a name, but he doesn't want to talk about this. He doesn't want to give any more details. And then there was a second time when we get Willa mentioned, that actually. A long time later, when Arya falls in with the Brotherhood without banners, Ned Dayne, the young heir to the Dayne house, who happens to be there, he was Beric Dondarrion's squire, and he engages her in conversation and says, "My lady mother had no milk when I was little, so Willa had to nurse me." Arya was lost. "Who's Willa?" "Jon Snow's mother. He never told you? She served us for years and years, since before I was born." So clearly this story that Jon Snow's mother is Willa is out there. This is the official story that Jon had, sorry, that Ned had, and also House Dayne were giving out, that this was Willa was the mother. But this doesn't sit right with people. And it doesn't sit right with people for a number of reasons. Firstly, because, as Robert Baratheon, you know, full of bluster, sort of basically says, this isn't like Ned. Him having a bastard child, it's not like him. That doesn't seem. He knows him very well. He grew up with him in the Eyrie. It doesn't sit right. And also, his shame seems unnecessary. We hear this quite a few times from different people, not just Robert Baratheon, who basically says you're too hard on yourself, but other people are just like, what's the problem? Okay, so you slept with someone. You're a lord. You slept with someone, and then you've got a bastard child. Yeah, name me a lord that doesn't have any bastard children. It's a bit weird that Ned is so ashamed of this, and it's often overlooked when we talk often about Cat and her relationship with Jon and the way that she clearly despises Jon. But even she, actually, when you get into it, even she is okay with Ned having a bastard. And if you don't believe me, listen to this. This is her thoughts in her, I think it's her first chapter. "Many men fathered bastards. Catelyn had grown up with that knowledge. It came as no surprise to her in the first year of her marriage to learn that Ned had fathered a child on some girl chance met on campaign. He had a man's needs after all, and they had spent that year apart. Ned off at war in the south while she remained safe in her father's castle at Riverrun. He was welcome to whatever solace he might find between battles, and if his seed quickened, she expected he would see to the child's needs. She wasn't angry about it. In fact, she expected it. This was normal to her. There's literally no problem from Cat's side with the idea that Ned had a bastard child. Ned says, "Oh, I dishonoured Cat." She does not feel dishonoured, not in the slightest. What she's angry about is the fact that Ned installed Jon, set Jon up there in Winterfell, in the castle, before she'd even arrived, and made him a part of his household. So to Cat, that was like parading his bastard son in front of everybody else. What she was expecting, what was the normal way of things, was okay, you have a bastard son, but then you just you leave them somewhere just out of reach, out of sight, but you make sure that they're well cared for. You send a little bit of money, some presents every now and then. Everybody knows who they are. Maybe when they grow up, they might sort of make an appearance at court, that kind of thing, but they're out of sight. So that was what Cat was angry about. Cat did not feel dishonoured. Cat thought this was just normal. So why is Ned so ashamed? Why doesn't he want to talk about it? The mystery keeps on growing. So what we also have here is that this issue is that if we say this is Willa, say we go with this. If this was Willa, Ned had a bastard child with Willa, this wet nurse, then what happened in some way, shape, or form was he had a bastard child with a servant from House Dayne, way to the south, took the child, refused to name her, to say who it was, and headed up north. And that's odd, because why would you do that? Why would you feel the need to take this child with you and have this child as part of your household? And if you did, and you ripped this newborn child from its mother's arms, denied the mother access ever to her child, why was it that House Dayne loved Ned Stark? Because they did. They named their heir after him. And their heir heard so many amazing stories about Ned Stark that he crept into the tourney at King's Landing in order to try and just sneak a glimpse of him. The Danes love Ned Stark, so that doesn't quite add up. And another thing which doesn't quite add up is the timing, because George R. R. Martin is quite vague on timing around this period, around Robert's Rebellion. He doesn't like to go into it on this exact date this happened, on that exact date something happened. So we're just talking broad parameters here. But he does say that Jon Snow was born 8 or 9 months before Daenerys Targaryen. Now, you can work out roughly where Ned is at that point in time, further conception, if you trace your way back 8 or 9 months before the conception of Dany, which we know when that was. 8 or 9 months before that, Ned's probably in Winterfell. Maybe he's on his way there, maybe he's on his way just a little bit south, but he's definitely somewhere like there up in the north. What on earth would a servant from House Dayne, who's been with them for years apparently, be doing right at the other end of the continent? Something here does not add up. And so it makes sense that Ned doesn't want to talk about it. He doesn't want to answer any questions about it. The only person that he has to answer questions from is Robert Baratheon. And the moment Robert Baratheon starts just asking a few gentle questions, what did she look like? What was, tell me a bit. Ned's like, I don't want to talk about it. And puts emotional pressure. For the love that you say you bear me, don't ask me anything. He's basically begging him, do not make me say anything about this. So this is the mystery which is set up. We're told the official story. It's clearly not that. There's something wrong with this story. It is a cover story, and it seems to be a cover story for one person, and one person only, which is Robert Baratheon. Because for everyone else, if Ned wanted to, and he did, he could just refuse to say it. The only person he needed a cover story for was Robert Baratheon. So that leads us to the question, why didn't he want his best friend to know Jon Snow's mother's identity? Now, we all know where the answer for that might be. But let's go through another couple, because there are a couple of other names which are sometimes thrown out as possible mothers. And the second name is, and it's not even a name, it's a fisherman's daughter. And we hear this story, I think it's even in book 5, I think it's A Dance with Dragons, before we even hear this. Davos is at the Sisters, which those are the islands, are sort of, if you imagine the bight, the bit of water between the north and the Vale. There's some islands in there, and we read this. Davos gets told this. To get home and call his banners, Stark had to cross the mountains to the Fingers and find a fisherman to carry him across the bight. A storm caught them on the way. The fisherman drowned, but his daughter got Stark to the Sisters before the boat went down. They say he left her with a bag of silver and a bastard in her belly. Jon Snow, she named him, after Arryn. So, and that's the first and last we hear of that. So again, this is like, why the shame? We have to ask. Well, if this is the case, why is Ned so ashamed of that? He wasn't married at the time. He wasn't engaged to anyone at the time. He was young and carefree. He was Lord of the North. He could do what he wanted to. And again, why take the child from the mother? What Why arrive with a Dornish wet nurse? Why not bring the mother up? And also, the timing doesn't quite work. That was too early. He had to get up to Winterfell before the timing of the conception. So none of that, again, sort of adds up. Then we get the third name, which is the name many people latch onto, which is Ashara Dayne. And clearly there are rumours about her. Rumours at Winterfell, and Cersei has also heard the rumors. And this does kind of make sense at one level. They did meet, Ned and Ashara, at the tourney at Harrenhal, and they danced there. We're told who Ashara Dayne danced with, and one of those was Ned. So there's that. And we also know from Sir Barristan Selmy that she was dishonoured at the tourney at Harrenhal, which probably means she slept with someone. Sir Barristan has got a rather traditional sense of code of honour, let's put it that way. So she was dishonoured there. Now, that was obviously way before the point of conception of Jon Snow, but people wonder, maybe they fell in love, maybe she kind of followed him up to Winterfell. We certainly know that she was down in Starfall after the Tower of Joy. But again, the timings seem a little bit weird. Are we really saying that she went all the way up to Winterfell and then hid? Because nobody at Winterfell knows her or remembers her up there. He kept her as his secret lover. The House Dayne is not an insignificant house. House Dayne are a very important house, one of like the second tier houses down in Dorne. She was one of the most famous people in the land. So are we saying that she came all the way up to Winterfell and just sort of hung around there? She became pregnant and then headed down to Starfall after that? Well, it seems a little far-fetched to start with, but then you have to take into account again the Danes' real love for Ned Stark. Because what you'd have to believe, if you went down this route, is that Ned and Ashara fell in love. She travelled the length of the Seven Kingdoms to spend time with him. She fell pregnant with their child. He then married someone else and went off to war, headed down to the Tower of Joy, where she killed Ashara's brother. He took Ashara's child with him, and refused to acknowledge her as the mother, headed back up to Winterfell. Um, Ashara Dayne herself then took her own life, throwing herself from the highest tower in Starfall, and they concocted some story rather than blaming Ned. They concocted some story that this was Willa, the wet nurse, um, and thought that he was so amazing for taking this child, for abandoning Ashara Dayne. They thought he was so amazing that they then named their firstborn son after him. Again, it doesn't kind of add up. Similarly, Barristan Selmy here. Barristan was low key in love with Ashara Dayne. We can see that from his POV chapters, and he thinks she was dishonored. If he thought that she was dishonored by Ned Stark, he would hold Ned Stark in very low regard, but he doesn't. He holds him in very high regard, in fact. So again, that doesn't add up. Why? Well, you know that I believe that actually this was Howland and Ashara, but that's another video entirely. None of the possibilities of who Ned might have slept with seem to work. None of it adds up as to the timing, as to who they might be, as to why he's so ashamed of it. None of this kind of works. Which is why we then have to start coming to this idea that we obviously know that there's no evidence that Ned himself is the father. It's against his character. He's clearly hiding something. And we have to acknowledge, though, that it is in his character to take the blame for something that he didn't do in order to save his family when they're in danger. The classic example of this is actually in book one. He's there in the black cells, and you get Varys coming to speak to him, and Varys is trying to persuade him to lie, to say, yes, I was plotting and scheming to be taking the throne from Joffrey, and take the throne for myself, and all the terrible things. And Ned's like, why should I do this? I'm a man of honor, etc., etc. And Varys says, for your daughters, because if you do, you'll get to go up to the Night's Watch, and they will be safe. If you don't, they won't. And Ned took on the lie that he was plotting evil things in order to protect his daughters. So this is clearly a part of his character. So then we have to start thinking about Jon himself. He's grown up, obviously, by the time we get to the main story, and so we can actually see what he's like as a man. And it's immediately apparent that he is quite Starkish. So if Ned's not the father, maybe the mother is a Stark. And the obvious answer here is Lyanna, who we know disappeared for a long period of time. Ned went to the Tower of Joy where she was dying, and then emerged with a baby. So that all kind of adds up. And we're told that Jon has Starkish looks, and there is a sort of a clue that you have to kind of dig into the story to get, but I think is quite a strong one, where Arya thinks to herself, Jon looks like me. Out of all of the Stark siblings, she thinks Jon looks like me. Does that just mean that Jon looks a bit Starkish? Well, perhaps. But then you have to remember the fact that Ned, on several occasions, thinks to himself, Arya looks like Lyanna. And if you then add those two things together, that means Jon looks like Lyanna. Um, so we're now saying, okay, so maybe Ned's not the father, but Lyanna seems likely to be the mother. Do we have any clues of this? Now, this is the point we're going to start digging into the text, and it becomes not just like trying to go for here's like a specific proof text here, but we're just trying to get a feel for what was going on, most of which is through Ned's thoughts. Now, Ned he's clearly suffering from some kind of post-traumatic stress about everything that happened there. So he doesn't often think about these things directly, but we can start to see the connections that he makes in his mind between various different things. And I think that is one of the biggest areas of clue that we have. He thinks back, for example, to Lyanna. Um, Robert will never keep to one bed, Lyanna had told him at Winterfell on the night long ago when their father had promised her hand to the young lord of Storm's End. I hear he has gotten a child on some girl in the Vale. Ned had held the babe in his arms. He could scarcely deny her, nor would he lie to his sister, but he had assured her that what Robert did before their betrothal was of no matter, that he was a good man and true, who would love her with all his heart. Lyanna had only smiled. Love is sweet, dearest Ned, but it cannot change a man's nature. Um, so that's the kind of the starting point, is that we have Lyanna here, who clearly doesn't want to marry Robert Baratheon. She doesn't like the idea that he would be sleeping with other people. Incidentally, a bit of a contrast with Cat, who was okay with the idea. A man has needs. It's fine. What he does when we're not together, that's up to him. Lyanna does have an issue with this. So we get to this part in the story down in King's Landing. Ned is sort of he's got his investigating hat on, and he's wandering around trying to find out what was it that Jon Arryn was looking for, what was Stannis hunting for. And Littlefinger basically says, "Look, follow me. I'll show you." And Ned's investigating this idea that Robert visited brothels, which he kind of thought made sense. But when he's doing that, he then thinks about this with Lyanna, and Lyanna's thinking that's what he was like, and he finds it hard to kind of disagree. Then he meets the sex worker that Robert Baratheon had a child with, and she, curiously, this sex worker, makes Ned promise her something. Tell him that when you see him, my lord, as it please you. Tell him how beautiful she is. I will, Ned had promised her. That was his curse. Robert would swear undying love and forget them before evenfall, but Ned Stark kept his vows. He thought of the promises he'd made with Lyanna as she lay dying, and the price he'd paid to keep them. I will tell him, child, Ned replied, and I promise you, Barra shall not go wanting. So this is kind of multi-layered dialogue. There's a lot going on. The central point here is that there's a woman with a child who is asking Ned to promise her something, and Ned promising he will make sure the child's going to be looked after. And that makes him think straight away about the promises he made to Lyanna. So George R. R. Martin is inviting us to make this connection. A woman with a child, making Ned promise her something that he would be the child would be looked after, and Ned thinks about Lyanna and the promises he made her. And then crucially, the very next thing he thinks about, the very next line is this. She had smiled then, a smile so tremulous and sweet that it cut the heart out of him. Riding through the rainy night, Ned saw Jon Snow's face in front of him. So immediately after thinking about the promises that he'd made Lyanna, he thinks about Jon Snow. So the connection is straight away there. Eh, Robert Baratheon frequented brothels. Lyanna didn't like that. She didn't want to be with a man like that. Later, she had a baby, and at her urging, he promised to look after it, a promise he kept at great personal cost. And that's when he thinks about Jon. So he then, and this is a fantastic passage. Do go and look this up. By the way, there's so many extra layers going on here, which kind of gets interrupted. I should probably say this is soon after this is when Jaime suddenly turns up, and we get the whole confrontation there. Ned gets the wound, and things move on. But Ned's just going through so many different thoughts. He then asks a question of Littlefinger, who's just like alongside him at the time. He says, why would Jon Arryn take a sudden interest in the king's base-born children? The short man, Littlefinger, gave a sudden shrug. He was the king's hand. Doubtless Robert asked him to see that they were provided for. Ned was soaked through to the bone, and his soul had grown cold. It had to be more than that, or why kill him? Littlefinger shook the rein from his hair and laughed. Now I see. Lord Arryn learned that his grace had filled the bellies of some whores and fishwives, and for that he had to be silenced. Small wonder. Allow a man like that to live, and next he's like to blurt out that the sun rises in the east. There was no answer Ned Stark could give to that but a frown. For the first time in years, he found himself remembering Rhaegar Targaryen. He wondered if Rhaegar had frequented brothels. Somehow, he thought not. So now we've got the whole picture of Ned's thoughts going on here. We've got Lyanna didn't want a woman like Robert Baratheon who frequented brothels. Being asked to a woman with a child asking him to promise her something, look after that child, reminds him of the promises he made to Lyanna. That in turn reminds him of Jon Snow. And then going through all of this, his brain goes, I bet Rhaegar Targaryen didn't frequent brothels. So the whole picture in this one section, it establishes the key points we've got here. Lyanna didn't want a woman like Robert. She did want a woman like Rhaegar. She had a child. She made Ned promise to look after that child. It's all there in that one little section. And then you have to say the story we know, everybody agrees Rhaegar and Lyanna were together at the right time. They were, even if you take the dramatic and very wrong assumptions that this was an abduction of some kind, then they were, the chances of there being a baby emerging have to be there. So it's not as if we're, Rhaegar and Lyanna producing Jon is a shock to anyone here. It actually makes sense. And although I'm not going to go hugely down this route, it's worth pointing out that Ned's assessment of Rhaegar that's not just Ned's. There's no indication Ned knew Rhaegar particularly well. But those who did seem to know him better also held him in very high regard. Barristan Selmy held him in high regard. Jaime seems to have held him in pretty high regard too. So all of this does fit together. So that's the sort of the logistics and the hints that we get from Ned, who is the one person who, as a POV character, does know what was going on. But there's more symbolism out there as well. George R. R. Martin didn't just sort of like drop that and then walk away from this. That we get symbolism throughout this story that leads us to suspect what happened. And first of all, we've got the House of the Undying. Dany goes to the House of the Undying, and she gets visions. These are true visions. Some of them are perhaps things that could have been but weren't, but the majority of them are true visions. And one of them is of a sweet-smelling blue winter rose growing from a chink in a wall of ice. The blue winter rose, we're told, that was Lyanna's favourite flower, the blue winter rose. So if that's growing in a chink in the ice, this is Jon at the wall, a wall of ice. The implication of that, I will do a bigger video at some point about the House of the Undying. The implication of the placement of that vision is that there will be some sort of a romance between Jon and Dany, but the point of that there is that Lyanna has a presence at the wall, and that's Jon. But then we get Bael the Bard, and this is a story from a long time ago, from the north, and with a guy called Bael the Bard, he was a king beyond the wall. But before he became king beyond the wall, he went to Winterfell and stayed in disguise as a singer, and he did a great job. Such a good job that the Lord Stark at the time asked him to name his own reward for his singing. He said, "Oh, all I need is just the most beautiful flower that grows in your gardens." And he was given this blue winter rose. Again, the Lyanna reference. But the next morning, he'd vanished. And so had Lord Stark's only daughter. And on her bed was this blue winter rose. And they were gone for a year before she's found again with a baby, Bael the Bard's baby. So that's the story. And eventually that child grows up to inherit Winterfell. There's a few interesting elements to this as well, though, which is that this isn't a story told south of the wall. This is a story when people south of the wall are told, they generally don't even believe it. They accuse Bael of being sort of a rapist or an abductor of some kind, which, again, takes us across to these illusions of the story R+L equals J, because Rhaegar was accused of those things as well. So if you take the high-level elements of that story, what we have is a story that George R. R. Martin wants us to link to Lyanna, because he uses this blue winter rose idea about this future king beyond the wall, who plays the harp. Rhaegar played the harp. He disappeared with Lord Stark's daughter for a year or so, which happened with Rhaegar and Lyanna. And she had a son with him who grew up to inherit Winterfell. He's then written out the potential love element of that is written out of the story that is told, and in its place is this story of abduction, but the child grows up to inherit Winterfell. It's the same story as R+L equals J, basically. And what's even more interesting is that every time that story is told within A Song of Ice and Fire, it is told to Jon, as if Jon needs to hear this story for some way. George R. R. Martin is wanting us to make the connection between Jon and that story. But there's other moments that we often. I said what I didn't want to do was sort of go and do proof texting, but there are some fun moments when you get this kind of like George R. R. Martin is almost kind of winking at the audience. If you're paying attention, you got this. You get Robert Baratheon in book 1 again saying to Ned, "Where are all your people?" Because the north seemed very empty to him. And Ned goes, "Likely they were too shy to come out. Kings are a rare sight in the north." Robert snorted. "More likely they were hiding under the snow." Snow, Ned. Who's hiding? The king. Kings are a rare sight. Snow. The link is there. And the word snow is italicized by George R. R. Martin to emphasize it. There's Jeor Mormont's raven that whenever it's around Jon, it often says "King, King," which is a hint because, and I don't. We could go down quite a long rabbit hole in this one. There will be different interpretations of who is within the line of succession, who is the rightful ruler of the Seven Kingdoms. But everything else sticking the same, and if everything we've been told is right, then obviously Eris II was king, and who should inherit from him? It would be Rhaegar, and after Rhaegar's death, it should be his eldest living son. And if his eldest son Aegon had died, then Jon would be the next, assuming they got married and he was legitimate, which I've got lots of questions about. So we'll cover that next time. But the working assumption with the king imagery is that Jon is therefore, in some people's interpretation, the rightful king of the Seven Kingdoms. Then you get one of my favorite little moments. You get Gilly and Jon. And Gilly is there north of the wall. Gilly's there. She doesn't understand about kings. And she's just trying to understand from Jon what a king is. And he sort of says, well, what do you think a king is? And she says, they say the king gives justice and protects the weak. She started to climb off the rock awkwardly, but the ice had made it slippery and her foot went out from under her. Jon caught her before she could fall and helped her safely down. So here she is saying, kings protect the weak, and then she stumbles and falls and Jon protects her. It's just such a small little nod to this idea from George R. R. Martin. I'm convinced it's not just coincidence. He didn't have to write that little thing in there, but he did. But then we get symbolism. We get Jon in words. Jon is mentioned, I think it's 6 times in connection with an ice dragon. Why ice dragon? Well, his heritage is Stark and Targaryen. So we're looking at fire and ice. Ice dragon is fire and ice. Then dragonglass. He's referenced a few times close to dragonglass, which is known as frozen fire. You get that reference when. Well, there's lots of references to the idea there might be a hidden dragon in Winterfell. There's a dragon hiding under Winterfell. Maybe one of the Targaryen dragons laid eggs and they got left underneath Winterfell. When Bran escapes Winterfell, through the eyes of summer, he sees what looks like a dragon roaring and escaping out of Winterfell. There's lots of imagery about a dragon being hiding in Winterfell. There's the Pact of Ice and Fire that a lot of people make connections with, which is the Dance of the Dragons. This was the deal made between the Targaryens and Jacaerys Targaryen and Cregan Stark that their children would marry. That never happened. Is that now something which was George R. R. Martin giving us foreshadowing there, the Pact of Ice and Fire, that is going to happen again in the future? And then we also get, if you accept the fact that Jon is the son of Rhaegar, then that comes with this idea: is he therefore the prince that was promised, which Azor Ahai? And you get Melisandre saying things like, "I pray for a glimpse of Azor Ahai in her flames, and R'hllor only shows me snow." And the snow there, the S is capitalized. She means Jon Snow. She asks to see Azor Ahai, and she sees Jon Snow. Added to which, he dreams of being Azor Ahai. We get this dream here. Burning shafts hissed upwards, trailing tongues of fire. Scarecrow brothers tumbled down, black cloaks ablaze. "Snow!" an eagle cried, as foemen scuttled up the ice like spiders. Jon was armored in black ice, but his blade burned red in his fist. As the dead men reached the top of the wall, he sent them down to die again. He slew a greybeard and a beardless boy, a giant, a gaunt man with filed teeth, a girl with thick red hair. Too late, he recognized Ygritte. She was gone as quick as she'd appeared. So in his dream, he's defending the wall against the dead, killing his lover like Azor Ahai did, wielding a fiery sword. He's dreaming of being Azor Ahai. Black ice armor, that sounds very much like dragonglass, frozen fire. So all of the imagery is there for him as Azor Ahai. We also get this wonderful thought when Jon's scoffing about what Melisandre was wanting to do, to wake a dragon, kill somebody with king's blood, which would help her wake a dragon. And he says, king's blood to wake a dragon, where Melisandre thinks to find a sleeping dragon, no one is quite sure. It's nonsense. Mance's blood is no more royal than mine own. And it's just like, oh, Mance's blood is no more royal than mine own. And it's like, I'm clearly not royal. But maybe you are. So the symbolic language is there all over the place. The symbolism there, the language usage is there, the plot points are there, Ned's memories all connect together to make this work. That's all there. Then you get the sort of the kind of external stuff that we should probably pay attention to, but it's not sort of textual evidence, which is that it was well attested to at the time that when the showrunners for Game of Thrones were pitching the idea that they should be left in charge of this, whatever you think of what they did later on, George R. R. Martin apparently asked them a question, which was, who's Jon Snow's parents? And they answered correctly. And that was part of the reason why he gave his thumbs up, that they should be allowed to take on his story, because they got the right answer. And what answer did they give? Well, clearly the answer they put in the show was that Jon Snow's parents were Rhaegar and Lyanna. So that's, I think, what we have to assume. And they had the handover meeting with George R. R. Martin, where he said all the things that were going to be coming, the main plot points that were going to be coming in the future, and they still went with R+L=J. Then you get Elio Garcia and Linda Antonsen, who, if you don't know them, I don't know if I haven't got the book with me right now, but like The World of Ice and Fire, the World book, basically, was co-written with them. George R. R. Martin trusted them so much that for a time he said publicly that they knew more about Westeros than he did. He used them as his personal fact checkers as well. And Linda has said that she and Elio have been saying for at least the last 10 years, and this was a while ago, so this is probably 20 years or so ago now, that R+L=J is not really a theory for us anymore. We're fully bought into it. So the people that George R. R. Martin actually has worked with, forget any of these other people who you might think have views we should pay attention to, the people that he's actually worked with on this universe, they are 100% convinced that R+L=J as well. So where are we at with all of this? Given that Rhaegar and Lyanna were together for so long, it actually, I think, seems completely reasonable for Rhaegar and Lyanna to have had a baby, in whatever the context of their relationship was, assuming it was intimate in some way. And the presence of the Kingsguard there also adds a huge amounts of evidence to the importance of the child, that there was a child there. Because when Rhaegar, he went to the Tower of Joy, he took his two buddies with him. He got called up basically to go and join the war, and he left the 3 Kingsguard, the 2 that were there plus the one who came to go and get him. He left those 3 at the Tower of Joy. Was it just to guard Lyanna? She didn't need 3, including Arthur Dayne recognized the greatest swordsman in the land. He didn't need 3 there if it was just her. If she was there against her will, then she could have been just chained up. If he just cared about her, if she was just a lover, then You didn't need 3 people there. You would, however, if you think that one of the most important people on your prophecy, sort of, he's very focused on prophecy, but if you think that this is going to be one of the most important people, there must be one more. The dragon must have 3 heads. Another thing that Danny saw in the House of the Undying. He thought that he needed to have 3 children. And if this was the 3rd child that was about to be born when he headed off, then yes, he would want the Kingsguard to be there. Otherwise, why would you keep 3 members of the Kingsguard there? So that all makes sense from that perspective. Ned's actions after the Tower of Joy are probably best explained by him trying to hide the baby's identity from Robert Baratheon, which only makes sense if the baby was Rhaegar and Lyanna's. Because why? And we're making this point at a very early point of this stream. Why would you need to keep the identity a secret from Robert Baratheon? Because the lie that they came up with was only about something that they could feed Robert Baratheon. Because they knew what Robert Baratheon would do if he found out that Rhaegar and Lyanna had a child. What would he do? Well, it's pretty clear. He completely approved of the killing of Rhaegar's other 2 children. It led to an argument between Ned and Robert, which, again, makes a lot of sense if you think that Ned is aware at that point that there is another child of Rhaegar's out there somewhere who's a member of his own family. And also later on, Robert Baratheon sends assassins to kill Daenerys. Again, an argument with Ned. Ned objects hugely to this. And it's not just because he's a good guy. These are the 2 most fundamental, biggest arguments that they'd had, those pair of best friends. So it's absolutely right. Definitely, there was a very good chance that that child would be killed by Robert Baratheon, almost certainly killed by Robert Baratheon if Robert Baratheon discovered the identity of that child. Added to which, then, there's no evidence that Ashara Dayne or Willow or anyone else was with Ned when they would have to be for him to be the father. And the Dayne family attitude towards Ned doesn't fit if Ned had had a child with Ashara or Willa, for that matter. It does fit if he actually saved Ashara Dayne. And this is where, as I say, I'm not going to go into the whole Ashara and Howland theory, but if he provided protection for her and they could go off and start a new life, that would be enough reason for them to love him. Ned's thought processes clearly show that he promised Lyanna he would look after a baby. I think that much is clear from what we have from his thought process. He promised Lyanna he would look after a baby. And when he thinks about that baby, he thinks about Jon Snow. And when he thinks about the father, he then thinks about Rhaegar. When he thinks about the mother, he thinks about Lyanna. This is the thinking. Yes, he doesn't ever come out and think, do you remember that time when Rhaegar and Lyanna had a baby? He doesn't ever do it like that, but clearly the things which remind him give the story that we need. Then we get the symbolism, which we've been talking about quite a lot, about the fact that Jon is associated with ice and fire, a mixture of Stark and Targaryen. He's associated with kingship. He's associated with Azor Ahai. Everything that we would expect if he were the child of Rhaegar and Lyanna. Added to which, as a kind of like a final thing, the people that George R. R. Martin worked with the closest in this world 100% believe in R+L = J. So, what this all adds up to, I think, is the fact that we often get this, and the reason why I've taken so long to go through all of this evidence is that what we often find when we're sort of here in the fandom, there's a random theory on the internet there, whatever, that comes out with a bit of evidence that maybe something else happened. And that's kind of held up against R+L equals J and say, well, it could be R+L equals J, or it could be this. The preponderance of evidence is never the same. R+L equals J has every kind of bit of evidence that you could possibly want to support it as a theory. Often people will kind of pick at what they think is the loosest thread and say, look, that bit doesn't work. That's fine. You could take away lots of different random threads from the R+L equals J theory, and it would still have a huge amount of evidence supporting it. Almost all of the other theories out there that you might hear, actually, when you look at what evidence is there in the story that these things happened, the answer is not a lot. What evidence is there symbolically that that's who Jon is, the child of those people? Why would that be important for the plot if it turns out that Jon's mother is that person? Why is it that Ned acted in the way that he did if actually it's that situation? These things, sometimes you'll find things that on the surface they sound quite convincing, but you're not comparing like with like. You're not comparing the mound of evidence we have for R+L equals J against an equal mound. It's often just a few random things that kind of sit together nicely. Which isn't to say I wish to be disparaging about. I like us having different theories about stuff. I will always welcome and read and try to critically assess any challenge to this. I think it's groupthink is a real issue in this kind of situation. Is that we could all just say, well, it definitely has to be this. So I think we do need to be open to other ideas. But thus far, personally, I've not seen anything which amounts to anywhere near the mound of evidence that we've got for R+L equals J. In fact, a lot of these other random theories rely on this, but it's too obvious. Which it only is actually obvious when you've had decades to sift through all of these books and pull out every single little bit of evidence that you've got. That to early readers, yes, the theories were there from early on, but to early readers, you'll find a huge amount of people who read through the books without a faintest idea of that theory, or it only slowly dawned on them as they were sort of moving through. Or maybe that's what was going on. So it's the kind of theory which has got a lot of information in there, and now occasionally people will use the large amount of information there to say it's obvious. It's not obvious, but when you go digging, then the clues are all there. So I think that's where we're sort of going to start pulling this bit of the live stream to an end. As I say, I've got a whole load of questions from my patrons. What I will be doing next time is going through all of those questions, answering some critiques of this theory, and a few sort of points of clarification about what was going on. I do want to say a couple of things, though. First of all, if you've been watching this live, could you say a thank you to the moderators? This is being done as a premiere, which means that the chat is still there and they'll be doing a fantastic job. I'm absolutely sure of that. So if you could just show them a little bit of love, I would love that. For myself, I'd also love to thank my patrons. I'll be answering your questions next week on this and another pre-recorded live stream. But this is because I'm not here to be answering questions. I've set this one up as a charity live stream or charity premiere, which means that you can donate. It is for an excellent cause. I will leave the information down in the description, but there should be a button somewhere for you to donate if you'd like to show your appreciation, or if you simply have a kind soul and a little bit of cash to spare, and I would hugely appreciate that. So thank you very much. I will be back this time next week to be looking at the questions about R+L equals J, and either this week or next week I will try and pop into the just to be saying hello. Okay, that is all for this time. If you are watching this back a little bit later, then appearing somewhere around here is going to be a link to other live streams that I have done. Appearing somewhere around here is linked to my Patreon page, which is the best way to support this channel if you wish to do so. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again next time. Bye.